Hi all, Tony Larsson from D-Design here. And in this very short video, I want to discuss a very simple case study and then ask a simple question. And the case that I want us to look at is when we have a product which has a very simple assembly and only needs two different factories to provide the full bill of materials. So let's imagine that we have a product that needs one factory for the metal parts and then one factory for the plastic injection moldable parts. In this case, where should we do the assembly? And this is the question that I want to discuss, because we have two different options here. The first option, that is that we let one of the factories do the assembly and ship out the final product. So maybe we ask the plastic factory and the metal factory if they provide assembly services, and then one of them might agree, and then they will be in charge of assembly. The second option is that we find a third specialized factory that is only responsible for assembly, and then we ship the two parts, the plastic parts and the metal parts, to that factory, and they ship out the final product. So, which one of these two options is best, and what are the pros and cons? And very briefly, basically, I think that we should go with option 2, and let me explain why. While option 1 might be simpler because we don't need to involve more parties into the process, we have less factories to work with, in the end it's risky. Because imagine now that there's a quality issue with one of the parts. Let's say that there's a quality issue with the plastic parts and they manufactured 1000 parts that have some kind of surface defect. It's not critical, it won't break the product, but it makes it look ugly. Well, if the plastic factory are the one responsible for the assembly, then they are also responsible for the quality assurance. And if their part has failed or has some kind of defect, then they are more likely to let that slip, because if they point out their own mistake, they will lose a bunch of money because you will likely ask them to redo that part. So they are basically incentivized to let their own errors slip. And that is issue number 1 with having one of the factories do the assembly. The second point for why I think it's actually better to have a third factory do the assembly is because a factory that specializes in assembly will have better quality assurance capabilities than a factory that basically does assembly like a side gig. So for that reason, again, your product will likely increase in quality when you involve a specialized factory. And then the third reason, and perhaps the most important one, is that involving a third factory that specializes in assembly might be a way to protect your IP. And let me explain. Let's imagine that we went with use case number 1 and we had one of the factories do the assembly again. Let's say that again it's the plastic factory. All that would need to transpire for that factory to start reselling your product to a third party, a competitor perhaps, is that factory, they call up the metal factory, ask them to ship out a bunch of parts like they have been doing for you, and then that plastic factory, they will have all of the ingredients for actually creating your final product and reselling it to competitors. And of course you can get a triple N agreement, you can get a bunch of contracts, but the reality is that unless you're a big company with a lot of money to actually pursue legal action, then the best type of IP protection is the one that is not written on paper, but the one that is actually just physical, the one that protects your idea in a way where they couldn't resell your product even if they would like to. Because now let's think about the second option. Because if we have a third factory do the assembly, then suddenly the process of actually reselling your final product becomes much more complicated. First off, an assembly factory, they will likely have a lot more reputation at stake if they are discovered to be reselling products. Because an assembly factory, they will always be managing the final product, and if a reputation starts to spread that they don't uphold agreements, then that could have a really bad impact on their business. That is the first reason. The second reason is that simply logistically it becomes more complicated, because then they would need to call up both the plastic factory and the metal factory, and perhaps if you have a third factory that provides some other part, then they would need to call that factory as well. And all of those parties would need to agree to basically break the agreement that they have with you. and resell their parts to this assembly factory. And that's just less likely than the case where you only need one phone call to get all of the components necessary for selling to competitors. So that is a super quick and simple breakdown of this issue. I go through this in much more detail inside of Product on Rails, which is the product development course and platform which I have developed based on my experience working as an industrial design engineer. If you're interested in learning more about physical product development, then I definitely recommend you to check out the free trial. I'll put a link in the description. And with that, I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.